Good morning. Well, it's morning here. Welcome back to Mostly Hairless Apes. I'm Dr. Gene Mesco, talking to you from the Church of Science. And Gesundheit, that's today's episode. I recently found that means to your health. And to your health really is an interesting occupation in the sense that you have to, you're saying health, and medically we would talk about, or biologically we would talk about homeostasis. But it's it's an operative function. It's a functionality issue. Uh, Looking at social interactions, you say Gesundheit to somebody when they sneeze. It's a traditional one I learned. But if you're toasting somebody, you'll often toast to their health, and that's apparently what Gesundheit literally translates as. Uh, Fun with Germanic languages, which English is one. And I was just wondering about what's the healthy state of society? Continuing my exploration of the political campaigns here. It's been fun watching this last week as Joe Biden retired and Kamala Harris stepped up to carry the torch for the Democrats. Donald Trump selected J.D. Vance and his hillbilly elegy to the Republican ticket. And we've had all sorts of fun interactions this week as we're solid in the dog days of summer here of August of 2024. And we're moving along. And I'm trying to figure out where the attitudes come from that would support the orange parasite in our society. The whole idea of the the it's always bothered me for years, the intermix of Christianity and capitalism that is the right side of the political aisle here in America. It boils down to those evolutionary adaptations that I've talked about before. When we talk about social adaptations for artificial selection, three big ones are belief systems, governments, and economies. Belief systems, I think, are at the core of what we think of as consciousness and free will. And somewhere along the way, during our development, our brains develop enough to be aware of our environment and we create a self. And when you create that self, that's really a neural circuit inside of our brains that says, hey, let me look at the available information that I have in my brain and make decisions about self stuff. And what information do we have? Well, we always have biological information bubbling up through our bodies. And we could talk about the region of the brain that's active when we're making decisions, the prefrontal cortex, and how the ventromedial portion of that, the lower middle portion of that, if you're standing upright, is primarily fed in with all the emotions and feelings coming up through our spinal cord and brainstem into our head and giving us information about being hungry or thirsty or anything else that's going on if we're angry about something. But we also have a dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and that's the outer layers of that frontal lobe that gets information from the rest of the brain, which is, I like to think of as memory information primarily. Information we've learned through our exposure to the environment. And that's where the government and the economy come in because we have to translate reality. Am I hungry? Well, what resources do I have? So your body's telling you you might be hungry, but your bank account's telling you what's your options for eating. And you have to balance that. That's what the brain is doing. It's balancing out these decisions between what we feel and what we know. We know you have so much money, you have so many resources available, you know what's in the refrigerator. And you know what, and if you're out somewhere, you know what the rules are. That's the government portion of the information. The government, I use government loosely, very loosely here, just to govern your behavior. That's the social input. That's why if you lose your prefrontal cortex, like Phineas Gage did back in the 1800s, and he was no longer Gage, if you're familiar with that story. There's an engineer in the 1800s who had a chunk of his brain blown out, but he survived for another 10 years. But he became a much more casual guy from the railroad engineer that he was, not nearly as fastidious and observant of social behaviors and norms. So, Who are we? We're trying to stay healthy. We're just balancing. We're looking for health, for homeostasis, for balance. And what do I have to balance in terms of behavior? I have to balance what my body's telling me about how I feel about stuff and what I know to be true about the environment, about what the rules are in a given social situation, what my resources are to work with, what the economy is telling me. And that's how we make decisions according to my model of the universe here in trying to figure out the Church of Science and figuring out us as evolving social primates. So we each wake up every day, and I woke up today, told myself I was going to do my podcast. And I said, well, how do I feel? I had a little snack. I had some breakfast, a light breakfast, a lovely blueberry scone that my daughter made, a cup of coffee, and that I'm content at the moment. I've got some stuff scheduled for the rest of the day. Got to get ready for the fall semester, but once again, back to politics. What's going on in the world? Oh, the silliness that's going on with politics is always about personality. We get caught up in people, and that's because we're evolving social primates. It does bug me that we have uh, the right and the left, and we can't seem to agree on stuff. And I'm going to explore that model that says, well, the left embraces primarily a government model. They primarily really embrace democracy. The Democrats, in their current manifestation, I think, do the best job of focusing on democracy and our form of government. And what does that mean? It means and that's why they get so bogged down and get called snowflakes, because they say, oh, wait, human life is the most important thing. Let's try to take care of all the people. And of course, that draws out screams of communism and socialism and all those fun things from the non-Democrats but that's to me the essence of America. One side of it, at least, we say people are important. Well, what's on the other side? Well, the right wing primarily focuses on a specific belief system generates that focuses on the economic issue that says how do we distribute resources. And this, I think, I realized as I was driving around here in Northwest Georgia, where I live, and I thought, wow, it's a really beautiful day. It's a lovely summer day. I was driving around through the backwoods of Georgia, tucked up here, and within the territory I'm in, there's a lot of open space. There's a lot of people who have their own land. A lot of second, third, maybe fourth generation families, and I realized that's where the conservative perspective comes from. If you're why I live in an amazingly red district. Uh, if you if you're familiar with U.S. politics, check out the 14th congressional district from Georgia. That's where I live, a little south of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it's a very red part of the country. What makes it so red? So conservative, so unwilling to change, as it were, which is really one of the definitions of conservatism. We want to conserve things, and we use conservation in a lot of different ways. But politically, conservative has come to mean people who it's almost sliding into we're going to be rigidly we're going backwards. Let's go back. Let's make America great again. What does that mean? Let's go back to what it was. The good old man on top, get it over with quick type stuff. The idea that certain things are as they should be. White folks in charge, people having land. But if you look at it at its fundamental level, I get it. I understand the source, one of the sources of this red conservatism that manifests in America. Because if I grew up in Northwest Georgia, I mean, I'm a transplant, I'm a damn Yankee. I came down south and I stayed from New Jersey. It's freaking crowded in New Jersey. A lot of people come out of New Jersey because it's one of the most densely populated states in the Union. I think it might be the most densely populated. And when people are on top of each other, you have to make different adjustments. Whereas down here in Northwest Georgia, I was able to buy, me and the bank, a fair amount of territory. I don't get to have to see my neighbor here. I've lived in a variety of places where I had to live right on top of my neighbors. And if you don't like your neighbors, that can be challenging. If you don't have enough room to do what you want to do. That can be really frustrating. And I think that's the essence of the whole idea of America being great again. It's really trying to capture that wonderful time in American history when we were on the frontier, we were exploring. And I think this is one that most people don't get, or they don't bother to step back and take the long look, which is what evolution and an evolutionary perspective gives you. You look at a long list of American life and you go back in time, and there's the whole frontier mentality, the whole Western mythos of being able to go out and get your own land, build your own castle, and be your own ruler. That's what it is. That's really what society's about. Somebody's got to be in charge. And on the homestead, if I'm the lord of the manor, I get to make the rules. I get to do what I want. I don't have to answer to anybody. And people in Northwest Georgia have had that because what happened is they got here, their ancestors got here in those waves of immigration from Europe, a bunch of white folks who left all those royal societies, all those empires that ended up blowing up back in Europe with World War One and World War Two, and all those crowded European countries that just exploded during the age of colonialism and went out and tried to take over the rest of the world. And a lot of the settlers ended up here in America. And they ended up here in America and they were able to get their own land. They no longer had to work for the lord of the manor and pay tithing to the church and the government, and pay taxes and answer to other people. They were free. That's the conservative wish, that they can get their own land and be free. And I love that. Everybody loves that. But that's the problem because they look at what's come about in the last in their lifetime, and they make occasional trips into the big city and they see crowding and they see crime and they say, the hell with that. I'm going back to the country where I can walk over, I can go to the snack shack down on the corner and I can get a burger and a Coke and not have to worry about anything. I can leave my car open in the parking lot and nobody's going to steal my stuff because it's all right here. It's all open space. I've got enough room to move. I can see my car as I'm standing there getting my burger. And it's not a problem. Nobody's going to break into it because there's no pressure based on the crowding. that, that may sound a little simplistic, but I think density in population is one of the fundamental um, details about building society and that drives a lot of adaptations. And once again, we're looking at this from an evolutionary perspective. And when we talk about adaptations, if you talk about population density as the primary component driving a lot of these political ideas, well, what's driving left versus right? Well, the left tends to be the upper classes who enough upper classes built into a more complex society. As a college professor, I mean, schools only make sense. So universities and colleges only make sense where you have enough people to support that infrastructure. We have enough tax base to do public education. And that's got a, there's density for that. Where you've got people working at different factories. And you have a high enough density to support schools, and people realize, oh, wait, the reason we could build these factories and build these technological world we live in is because we have enough people to drive the process and enough market share to push to make it a functional economic venture, because that's the only way we know how to do stuff. We have to structure a distribution of resources, and we've evolved with science and technology these different pyramids of economic power. We no longer just live off the land, which is a nice simplistic way to think about it, because the land's been taken up. We have way more people than we have available land right now. Right now, they talk about the housing crunch in a lot of parts of the states where there's not enough housing, because housing isn't about building a log cabin on a prairie home where you're going to farm your own land, which is part of that Western mythos that is part of the ideas for the conservative side of the aisle. We have to have our tech. We want electricity. We want cable. We want HVAC systems. We want all that civilization to go with it. And that's where the left gets frustrated with the right because we go, well, you want a technological society. Well, then we have to have all these people doing all these different things. We have to build up enough complexity. And there's the crunch. There's where left meets right. When we say, well, how many people are too many people? How much land should everybody have? Have enough room? Well, everybody wants enough room, and they want the tech, which comes with density. And where's the right balance? That's the trick. And as I said last time, I think one of the things we have to do is compress our socioeconomic system because the reason we don't have a lot of room at the bottom for people, or in the middle even, is because people at the top suck up way more resources than they should. And that's what we have to reconfigure. That's what we have to sort out. Because if I'm living here in Northwest Georgia and I've grown up on land that my parents and my grandparents and maybe even my great grandparents had, going all the way back for hundreds of them, 100+ years, you might actually be living on land that's actually yours. You actually own it, as opposed to me paying my mortgage. There's a carpetbagging damn Yankee that came down here. But people who've been here and own their land don't have to pay a mortgage. All they had to do is pay the utilities. You actually owned your house outright. Think about that. Think about owning the space where you live. A lot of people don't have that option. Homeownership is on the decline in America, and that's taking away from that American dream, that idea of freedom, that I can have my own space and not have to answer to anybody. And if you have somebody tell you, oh, I want to keep that for you and I want to keep out all the other people and keep the density low, you're going to support that idea. I think that's the main attraction of the orange parasite. He is somebody who said, hey, we're just going to keep out all these other people. We're going to stop doing this growth thing that we do. And that's the problem we've had. Because, and that's where I see the failings of the current American system because it says, well, wait a minute, we have all these people, but we don't want to distribute the resources. And we have to. We have to figure out a way to distribute the resources. Or we can just shut them out and fight about it. That's the alternative. That's where all the violence comes from. Because if you realize you have been dealt a really good hand in life, and that's where I think the religion comes in to couple with the capitalism. Because religion is a beautiful adaptation that allows you to stop thinking. And so this is where Christian conservatism comes in with the whole capitalist model. Because if you can construct in your brain and develop a belief system that says, oh, I'm, this is my God given right to have freedom. I can get guns to protect it. I've got this chunk of land, which, and this is where I see it differently. As an evolutionary biologist, I see it as pure historical happenstance that the last burst of colonialism that went on in the world filled up America, filled up the Americas. Over the last few centuries, humans who evolved out of Africa and filled up Asia and Europe over the millennia found the new world, and all of a sudden, busting out of the seams of all the old empires, all the old kingdoms, was this opportunity to get all this open space and have space of your own and not be piled in on top of everybody else and have to work out whatever compromises and battle for whatever space you could get. We had all this open space, and for the last few centuries, we've had this expansionist mode of thought, and we've been able to fill up a lot of territory. Well, guess what? We finally ran into limits again. We ran into limits because we filled up all the available space. And we thought it was a great idea to have a lot of kids to help work the farm. And all of those belief systems that supported that ideal lined up on the same side as ownership, as capitalism. That's why religious conservatism, Catholic Christianity, all of those things, all the belief systems that go with that Christian worldview lined up nicely with capitalism because God gave us this land and we own it and we're going to keep it and keep the others out, which is the same attitude that kings and queens have had for millennia about their empires. And people have adopted that and have justified it so they don't have to think about the fact that it's just historical happenstance. They're just riding the wave of colonialism that distributed land in America, gave the frontier, and said, "Hey, yeah, go conquer stuff." We're not those Native Americans. Use some slaves to do it. What does it matter if you can conquer the wilderness, you can have the land, and that's the core ethos of the right side of the aisle of the Red Hat brigades that currently exist in America. And what are they opposing? They're opposing the top down perspective of organized society, which when all the royals caught up with us, and they're the people who say, oh no, we should need to have these pyramids of power. We need to have these social structures that say, we're on top and we're going to make the decisions for, and we'll try to be as benign as possible. Because that's, other than democracy, the choice, other than everybody making their own decisions, which works at low density. If you're making your own decisions and you have a lot of room to play out your decisions, then you can have this amazing thing called democracy because you can literally do whatever you want. Freedom is only a real thing up to the boundaries that you run into. Biologically, if you wanted to live on the land, you know, like the Native Americans did, where you're just hunting and gathering and doing a little farming with the available space, and we haven't filled up the land, you can pretty much do what you wanted. But that only works at low density. And where we are now globally with 8 billion people is we're at high density in a lot of places. And people don't want high density to come their way because that means we're going to have to share because that's what happens at high density. And that's the conflict we have to deal with. It's really the essence of the equation in terms of the political nature of things. How many people is too many people? How many people is enough people? And that's where we have to figure out a better balance. But that's where we are politically right now. People on the right are saying, hey, keep that down. That's why we get into those people and these people, them and us, because we haven't ever embraced the fact that we're one species, that we're one shared biological entity that has taken over a planet. And we're the dominant apex predator. We've wiped out. That's why a lot of the other big predators are endangered. When you talk about lions and cats, because we've gotten rid of all the dangerous animals that threatened us directly, and we knock them down. And we deal more. Biggest threats to humanity now are actually microbes, pathogens, because of that density issue. We've built up the density, and so we're oscillating. We're at a point where we need to figure out the right balance between how many people we have and how do we distribute the resources. And the left is trying to say, well, let's do the math. Let's fucking do the science. And I guess that's why I sit on that side of the aisle, because it's a problem that we have to figure out. And the people on the right just say, nope, I got mine. You go figure out how to get yours. And that's just not going to work in the long run because what's going to happen if there's more people on one side of the fence, eventually they're going to knock the fence over. And you're only going to be able to resist that change. You have to either fight or switch. I think there was an old commercial like that for some cigarette brand. So where does that excuse me? So where does that leave us politically today? It leaves us with one side of the aisle saying, nope, we're shutting it down, we're building the fences, we're keeping out the people. The other side figuring out oh, wait a minute, how do we share? How do we actually make this equitable? And the real trick is to say, well, we can do this. We can do this without fighting. We can do this without killing each other. We need to cut down on the population density. We need to distribute resources as fairly as we can. So, what do we need to do? We need to compress the wealth scale. And that's the real problem. The U.S. doesn't appreciate how wealthy we are and how much money we have. I mean, I'm a sports fan. If you're a fan of any major enterprise nowadays, you look at the people at the top of that pyramid, you go, how the heck do we afford paying people tens of millions of dollars a year? And people say, I don't have money for stuff. That's ridiculous. We have tons of money. We have huge resources. Whereas we used it to require 200 years ago, three out of every four people had to work on farms just to give us enough to eat. Now, 2% of the population works on farms. More people work in the distribution networks, but it's still much lower. And that's why we have unemployment. And that's why we have problems because we don't need most of the crap we have. We create the economy as an artificial adaptation. It's how we decide to structure the society. And what we have to realize, the only thing we have to realize, which is what the Church of Science preaches, is that we are evolving social primates in an artificial environment that we create. And what do we use to create it? We use an economy. We create an economy to distribute resources, and we create a government to make the rules as to how to distribute those resources. And once you do that, when you embrace the Church of Science as your belief system, and you say, all right, we have to figure out how to do that. Well, then you just say, well, if there's too much at the top, if the one percenters are sucking up too much resources, they're using it to buy off judges and pay politicians. We need to nip that in the bud. We need to put a cap on capitalism and say, we're going to tax the rich. We're going to do that so that we can stay healthy and we can distribute some of those resources down. And here's the really big one. Here's the thing that'll really make us healthy. If we decide, because we argue about should we have a capitalist economy? Oh, you want socialism. But if you cut out welfare, if you actually cut out Social Security, a bunch of people here in Walker County would be pretty upset. A bunch of people in the red hat districts of the country would be pretty upset because, hey, guess what? Social Security and welfare go to white people too. And so we already are distributing a lot of things and redistributing the economy. And more tax dollars go into red states than they go into blue states. Blue states are a net payer. Red states are a net sink for tax dollars. So don't tell me about government redistribution and socialism and fascism and then say, oh, you want freedom. It's all about having a healthy ecosystem. And we create that artificial ecosystem as mostly hairless apes who are evolving social primates. And what do we need to do? We need to say, hey, here's the economy that we could have. And this is what we'll talk about next time. The economy of what we need versus what we want. And what we need should be social, should be a social economy that says, hey, let's educate everybody. Let's get everybody health care. Let's get everybody housing and establish what's a reasonable reproductive rate. And when we do that, then we can also say, well, what do we want on top of that? Where do we want to go? And we could pick a goal and we could get away from picking people and we could start having politics that's about ideas instead of people and not worry about people. Because if everybody had what they needed to just develop normally, to just develop healthy, and that's where we could say to your health, we could say Gesundheit, we could say have a healthy life and do what you want. And you can only do that if you're free enough to not to be free from want. That's the world we should be building. And that's the world I'll talk about next week. Take care.